$200,000. That's how much I gave my daughter so she could buy her dream house. And 3 months later, she was screaming at me, "Get out of my house!" I left smiling because I knew that they would soon regret it. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. $200,000. That's exactly what I gave my daughter so she could buy the house of her dreams. 3 months later, she was screaming at me, "Get out of my house!" I left smiling. She didn't know I was already preparing my revenge. The living room still smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. Maria paced near the fireplace, her face flushed with anger. Nicholas leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, that familiar smirk playing on his lips. The coffee mug I'd been holding lay shattered on the hardwood floor, brown liquid spreading like spilled blood. "Dad, you're not needed here anymore." Maria's voice cut through the evening air like a blade. Her words hung in the space between us, heavy with finality. I stood frozen, still processing what I just heard. The family photo on the mantel, the one from last Christmas where we all looked so happy, seemed to mock me now. My pension savings, my sacrifice, my dreams of family dinners and grandchildren's laughter, all of it crumbling in real time. "This is our home now," Nicholas added, his tone casual, almost bored. "Your place is elsewhere." The deed to the house sat on the coffee table, Maria's signature bold and fresh. My $200,000 had bought her this moment of power. She waved it at me like a weapon, her wedding ring catching the overhead light. "But you promised," I said quietly, remembering that day at the bank when she'd cried tears of joy. "You said we'd be a family, that I'd have a place here." Maria's laugh was sharp, bitter. "Things change, Dad. We need our space. You understand, don't you?" The smell of the new carpet mixed with the scent of betrayal. I looked around the room I'd helped make possible, the expensive furniture, the flat-screen TV, the kitchen renovations visible through the archway. Every dollar had come from my retirement account, from decades of careful saving. I walked to the coat closet, my movements deliberate and calm. The wooden hangers clinked softly as I retrieved my jacket. Behind me, I heard Nicholas whisper something to Maria, followed by her stifled giggle. "Where will you go?" Maria asked, though her tone suggested she didn't really care. I turned to face them both, my smile forming slowly. It wasn't the smile of a defeated old man. It was something else entirely. Something that made Nicholas shift uncomfortably and Maria's laughter die in her throat. "I'll figure it out," I said, my voice steady. I always do. The front door, the one I'd paid to have reinforced with a security system, closed behind me with a soft click. The September evening in Billings carried the first hint of autumn chill. Mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. I stood on the porch for a moment, breathing in the crisp Montana air. A neighbor's window flickered with warm light, and I could hear the distant hum of traffic on the main road. The driveway stretched before me, leading to my old Honda parked at the curb. As I walked to my car, a memory stirred. Something about that day at the bank, about Maria's eyes when she'd hugged me after the transaction. There had been something there, a flicker of something that didn't match her tears of gratitude. I climbed into the driver's seat, the leather cold against my back. The engine turned over with the familiar rumble. In the rearview mirror, I could see the house glowing with warm light. My house, bought with my money, now closed to me forever. But as I drove through the darkening streets toward the budget motel on the edge of town, That smile never left my face. They thought they'd won. They had no idea what they just unleashed. The motel room smelled of disinfectant and old cigarettes. I set my single suitcase on the bed and pulled out my wallet, thick with old receipts and faded photos. Among them was the bank slip from 6 months ago, $200,000 withdrawal, signed in my careful handwriting. I sat on the edge of the bed, the document trembling slightly in my hands. The memory crashed over me like a wave. The First National Bank of Billings had been busy that Tuesday morning. The teller, a young woman with kind eyes, had processed the withdrawal with professional efficiency. Maria sat beside me, her hand on my arm, her voice soft with emotion. "Dad, I can't believe you're doing this for us," she'd whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "This house, it's everything we dreamed of." I'd handed over the cashier's check, watching her eyes light up with joy. $200,000. My entire retirement savings, minus the small amount I'd kept for basic expenses. 40 years of engineering work, overtime shifts, careful budgeting, all of it condensed into one piece of paper. "We'll live together as a family forever," Maria had promised, clutching the check to her chest. "Nicholas and I have already talked about it. You'll have your own space, your own privacy, but we'll be together. Sunday dinners, holiday celebrations, everything." The bank lobby had hummed with activity around us, tellers counting money, customers filling out forms, the soft murmur of financial dreams being processed. I'd signed the papers with steady hands, thinking of my late wife Margaret, wondering if she'd approve of this gesture. "Dad, you're the most generous man I know," Maria had said, her embrace warm and genuine. "We'll take care of you, I promise." Now in this sterile motel room, I set the receipt aside and reached for my phone. 3 missed calls from an unknown number. I ignored them and opened my banking app, scrolling through recent transactions. That's when I saw it. A small discrepancy I'd missed before. A transfer from Maria's account to an unknown recipient dated just 2 days after the house purchase. The amount was substantial enough to catch my attention. Rain began pattering against the window, each drop echoing the growing doubt in my mind. I pulled out another document from my wallet, the original house listing Maria had shown me months ago. The asking price had been $180,000, not the $200,000 I provided. I stood and walked to the window, watching the droplets race down the glass. The parking lot below was nearly empty, just a few cars scattered under the dim street lights. In the distance, the lights of Billings twinkled like fallen stars. That celebration dinner at Romano's restaurant came flooding back. Nicholas had ordered the most expensive wine, his voice loud and cheerful. "To family," he'd toasted, raising his glass. "To new beginnings." Maria had glowed with happiness, her hand resting on mine across the table. "Dad, you've given us everything. The house, the stability, the future. We'll never forget this." But there had been something in Nicholas's expression, a satisfied smirk that didn't quite match his grateful words. And Maria's eyes, when she thought I wasn't looking, had held a calculating gleam that should have warned me. "You know," Nicholas had said casually, cutting into his steak, "Maria and I were thinking about maybe getting some new furniture. Something that really fits the space." "Of course," I'd replied, not understanding then what I was agreeing to. "Whatever makes you happy." My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Evans, this is regarding your recent financial transaction. Please call us at your earliest convenience." I stared at the message, my smile returning. The rain continued its steady rhythm against the window, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the lonely whistle of a freight train cutting through the Montana night. I sat back down on the bed, the bank papers scattered around me like pieces of a puzzle I was finally beginning to solve. The fluorescent light above flickered intermittently, casting shifting shadows across the room. Tomorrow I would make some calls. Tonight I would remember every detail of their promises, every word of their gratitude, every moment of their deception. Because Maria and Nicholas had made one crucial mistake. They'd assumed that a quiet, generous old man would simply disappear when dismissed. They had no idea that 40 years of engineering had taught me to build more than just structures. Sometimes you build plans, and sometimes those plans are for revenge. As rain tapped the hotel window, I set the phone aside and drew out a snapshot from my wallet. The house looked so perfect in the photo. White picket fence, red brick, green lawn stretching toward the mountain backdrop. Maria had taken this picture the day we got the keys. October had been crisp and golden in Billings. The move-in truck arrived at dawn, its diesel engine rumbling in the quiet suburban street. Maria stood on the front porch, her face glowing with excitement, while Nicholas directed the movers with theatrical gestures. "This is our dream, Dad," Maria had exclaimed, throwing her arms around me as we watched our combined belongings disappear into the house. Everything we ever wanted. I'd carried box after box from my old apartment, books, photos of Margaret, my engineering awards, the small accumulation of a lifetime. The house swallowed them easily, rooms spacious enough to hold our separate lives and shared hopes. The living room had seemed enormous that first day. We'd arranged furniture under the big bay window, the one that looked out toward the distant Rockies. Maria hummed while she worked, occasionally stopping to squeeze my hand or show me where she planned to hang family photos. "Here," she'd said, pointing to the mantel above the fireplace. "Your retirement picture goes right here where everyone can see it." Nicholas had been helpful too in those early days. "Doug, where do you want your recliner?" He'd asked, genuine warmth in his voice. "We want you to have the best spot for watching TV." The first weeks had flowed like honey. Sunday morning pancakes in the bright kitchen, evening walks through the neighborhood as leaves turned amber and gold. Maria would link her arm through mine, chattering about her plans for the garden, while Nicholas discussed local sports teams and weather patterns. But tension built slowly, like water behind a dam. It started with small things. The utility bills arriving in November, higher than expected because of the large house. Nicholas had frowned over the electric bill one evening, his calculator clicking repetitively. "Jesus, Doug," he'd muttered, not quite under his breath. "You leave a lot of lights on for one person?" "I can cover the extra," I'd offered immediately, "whatever it costs." Marie had looked up from her magazine, something unreadable flickering across her face. "That's not the point, Dad. We just need to be more conscious." The mountain views from the kitchen window had seemed less spectacular after that conversation. I found myself counting the minutes I spent in each room, turning off lights even in spaces I was still using. Thanksgiving dinner had been strained. I'd volunteered to cook the turkey the way Margaret used to, but Maria intercepted with forced cheerfulness. "Oh no, Dad. This is our kitchen now. You just relax and let us handle everything." So I'd sat in the living room, listening to muffled conversations and the clatter of pots, feeling like a guest in a house I'd paid for. When Nicholas emerged to grab another beer, he'd pause by my chair. "You know, Doug, Marie and I have been talking about space, about independence. We're thinking maybe it's time we all had our own places again. The suggestion had hung in the air like smoke. I'd nodded politely, but something cold had settled in my chest. Of course, I'd replied. Whatever you think is best. But that night, lying in the guest bedroom that was supposed to be my permanent home, I'd stared at the ceiling and wondered when everything had changed. Now in the motel room, I folded the photograph carefully and slipped it back into my wallet. The rain had stopped, leaving only the sound of distant traffic and the hum of the heater. My phone buzzed again, another message from that unknown number. I picked it up this time, reading the full text. Mr. Evans, regarding your daughter's financial activity. We have questions about recent transactions that may require investigation. The mountain peaks were invisible in the darkness beyond my window, but I knew they were there. Steady, permanent, unmoved by the small betrayals of small people. I was beginning to understand that sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous. That uneasy quiet from Thanksgiving dinner stretched into the days ahead, pulling me deeper into recollection. As December settled over Billings with its first serious snow, the house had transformed from a home into a battlefield of polite aggression. The mornings were the worst. I'd wake early, as I always did, and pad to the kitchen to make coffee. The routine had become a careful dance of avoidance, timing my movements to miss theirs, cleaning up immediately so no trace of my presence remained. "Morning, Dad," Maria would say when she finally appeared, but her smile never reached her eyes anymore. She'd pour herself coffee from the pot I'd made, then immediately start wiping down counters I'd already cleaned. Nicholas was less subtle. He'd lumber into the kitchen in his bathrobe, grunting something that might have been a greeting, then stand pointedly by the coffee maker until I moved away. "Doug, maybe you could start making smaller pots," he'd suggested one gray Tuesday morning. "Seems wasteful to make so much for just one person." The comment had hit like a small slap. One person. As if Maria and he weren't benefiting from my early rising, my careful preparations. "Of course," I'd said, measuring my voice carefully. "I'll keep that in mind." The dinner table became a study in strategic seating. Where once we gathered naturally, now they sat together on one side while I faced them alone. Conversations flowed around me like water around a stone. Discussions of their plans, their friends, their future that somehow never included references to our shared living arrangement. "We're thinking of joining the country club," Maria had announced one evening, cutting her chicken into precise pieces. "Nicholas knows someone who can sponsor us." "That sounds lovely," I'd replied, though the membership fees alone would cost more than my monthly pension. "It's really more for couples," Nicholas had added with a shrug. "You understand." Silence fell. The sound of cutlery against plates seemed unnaturally loud. I started eating my meals earlier, claiming I wasn't hungry when they sat down for dinner. It was easier than watching them exchange glances over my head, easier than pretending their obvious hints weren't landing exactly where intended. The spare bedroom, my bedroom, had developed a chill that no amount of extra heating seemed to touch. I'd taken to wearing sweaters indoors, wrapping myself in blankets while reading, though the thermostat read a comfortable 72 degrees. "Dad, maybe you should see a doctor," Maria had suggested, finding me bundled on the couch one evening. "You seem cold all the time." Her concern might have been genuine, but I'd caught her exchanging a look with Nicholas. A look that said, "Old man, falling apart, burden." "I'm fine," I'd assured her, "just adjusting to the climate." But the real cold wasn't coming from outside. Christmas preparations had begun without me. I'd offered to help with decorations, to contribute to gift buying, to cook my traditional Christmas Eve dinner. Each offer was politely declined. "We want to do things our way this year," Maria had explained, not meeting my eyes. "Start our own traditions, you know." Our own traditions. In the house I'd bought for us to share. I'd taken to spending evenings in my room, door closed, reading engineering journals and listening to the muffled sounds of their life continuing without me. Sometimes I heard laughter from downstairs, warm and spontaneous, the kind that died immediately when I appeared. The untouched coffee growing cold on my nightstand had become a symbol of everything wrong. I'd make it each evening, intending to drink it while reading, then forget it entirely as my mind wandered to escape routes and contingency plans. New Year's Eve had been the breaking point. They'd made reservations at an expensive restaurant downtown, mentioning it casually as if I'd naturally understand I wasn't included. "You don't really like crowds anyway, Dad," Maria had said, applying lipstick in the hallway mirror. "You'll be more comfortable here." "Much more comfortable," Nicholas had echoed, straightening his tie. I'd watched them leave from the living room window, all dressed up and laughing as they climbed into the car I'd helped them afford. The house had felt enormous around me, every room echoing with the sound of my own breathing. Now back in the motel room, I understood that those final weeks had been a slow-motion eviction notice. They'd been training me to be absent, to take up less space, to need less attention. They'd been preparing me for exile, but they'd made one critical error in their calculations. They'd assumed that making me unwelcome would make me disappear quietly. What they didn't realize was that they'd given me time to think, time to plan, time to remember exactly how much I'd sacrificed and exactly how little I was willing to accept in return. My phone buzzed again. This time I answered. With those memories weighing heavy, I settled into the motel routine, pulling out papers from my bag. The plastic hotel key card sat on the nightstand, a reminder of how far I'd fallen from family patriarch to exile. But exile, I was learning, had its advantages. I spread my documents across the thin bedspread, bank statements, the house deed copy, insurance papers, and that mysterious phone number that had been haunting me all evening. The overhead light buzzed like an angry wasp, casting harsh shadows across the financial trail of my generosity. The first call came at 8 a.m. "Mr. Evans? This is Patricia Chen from First National Bank's fraud department." Her voice carried professional concern. "We've detected some unusual activity on accounts associated with your name." I gripped the phone tighter. "What kind of activity?" "Sir, it appears a loan application was submitted using your Social Security number and signature for $60,000 secured against the property at 1247 Meadowbrook Drive." Fraud. The word hit me like a physical blow. "I never applied for any loan," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake in my chest. "The signature appears to match yours, Mr. Evans. Do you have any family members with access to your personal information?" I closed my eyes, pieces clicking into place like a jigsaw puzzle I've been too trusting to see. "Yes, my daughter and her husband." "I see. We'll need you to come in today to verify these documents. This is a serious matter, Mr. Evans. If fraud has occurred, we're looking at federal charges." After hanging up, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the papers scattered before me. The bank statement I'd glimpsed yesterday now made perfect sense. That mysterious transfer, timed perfectly with the loan approval. They hadn't just taken my gift. They'd stolen my identity to steal even more. I pulled out my reading glasses and examined the house purchase documents with engineer's precision. There, buried in the fine print, was a loan rider I'd never seen before. The application, supposedly signed by me, requested additional funds for home improvements and family emergencies. My signature looked perfect. Too perfect. I paced the small room, phone clutched in my hand, calling every number I could remember. The insurance agent confirmed additional coverage had been purchased in my name. The title company verified a second mortgage had been filed. "When did you say this was processed?" I asked the title clerk, a young man who sounded bored. "October 15th, sir. Standard procedure. Your daughter brought in all the paperwork, said you were feeling under the weather." October 15th? I've been healthy as a horse, helping them hang pictures in the living room while they process paperwork to rob me. The hotel room's single window faced the parking lot, where a few cars sat scattered like abandoned hopes. I watched a maintenance worker empty trash bins, his movements methodical and unhurried. Everything in this world continued its normal rhythm while my life cracked open like an egg. A knock at the door interrupted my fury. "Mr. Evans?" A gravelly voice. Unfamiliar. "Got a minute to chat?" I opened the door to find an elderly man in a worn flannel jacket, his face weathered by decades of Montana winters. He held a newspaper under his arm and offered a cautious smile. "Name's Bill Hartwell. Live next door." He gestured toward the adjacent room. "Couldn't help but notice you've been making some intense phone calls. Everything all right?" Something in his manner, the careful way he spoke, the knowing look in his eyes, suggested this wasn't a casual neighbor check. "Just sorting through some family business," I replied. Bill nodded slowly. "Family business can be tricky, especially when it involves that house on Meadowbrook Drive." I stared at him. "You know about the house?" "Son, I know about a lot of things. Been watching that property for months. Noticed some interesting visitors lately, people asking questions they probably shouldn't be asking." He pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket, a building inspector's preliminary report, dated just weeks ago. "Found this blowing around the neighborhood yesterday. Figured you might want to see it, considering you're the real owner and all." The report was brief, but damning. Foundation irregularities, potential structural concerns, recommended further investigation before final approval. "How did you—" I started. "Word travels fast in small neighborhoods, Mr. Evans, especially when people start bragging about pulling fast ones on family." Bill's eyes hardened. "Some of us old-timers don't appreciate that kind of behavior." I stared at the report, my hands shaking slightly. Not from fear this time, but from something much more powerful. That puzzling report propelled me out into the crisp morning, heading toward familiar streets. Bill Hartwell's information had given me the first weapon in what was becoming a very interesting war. I drove slowly through the subdivision, my Honda purring quietly along the tree-lined roads. November had stripped most leaves from the branches, leaving the neighborhood looking stark and honest. No more autumn disguises, just bare truth exposed to the winter air. The house looked different in daylight, somehow smaller than I remembered. I parked 3 blocks away and walked back, keeping to the opposite side of the street. A jogger passed me, earbuds in, lost in her own world. A dog walker nodded politely. Normal suburban morning, hiding extraordinary deception. From across the street, I could see what the building inspector had noted. Hairline cracks ran along the foundation's east wall, barely visible unless you knew where to look. The front steps sat slightly askew. settling unevenly into soil that had probably never been properly prepared. Terrible shame about that foundation. I turned to find an older woman raking leaves in the yard behind me. She wore gardening gloves and a knowing expression. "Excuse me?" "The foundation on that house." She pointed with her rake. "Been watching it settle wrong since they built it. Previous owners tried to hide it with fancy landscaping, but you can't fool geology." She introduced herself as Mrs. Patterson, 20-year resident of the neighborhood. Her words came with the authority of someone who'd watched every drama unfold from her kitchen window. "The builder cut corners, you see, didn't properly compact the soil, used cheaper materials than specified. Inspector was supposed to catch it, but..." She shrugged meaningfully. "How bad is it?" I asked, though I was beginning to guess. "Bad enough that the previous owners couldn't get homeowners insurance without disclosing it. Bad enough that 3 potential buyers walked away once they hired proper inspectors." My heart started beating faster. But the sale went through. "Oh yes," Mrs. Patterson said, her tone dripping with disapproval. "Someone managed to get it past the cursory inspection. Probably helped that the buyer's family was so eager, so trusting. Some people take advantage of that kind of trust." I thanked her and walked back to my car, mind spinning with possibilities. By noon, I was sitting in a coffee shop downtown, laptop open, researching Montana's real estate disclosure laws. The legal requirements were crystal clear. Sellers must disclose known structural defects, especially foundation problems. The previous owners had known. The real estate agent had to have known. Someone had deliberately hidden information that would have changed everything. My phone rang. Unknown number. "Mr. Evans? This is Janet Morrison from Structural Solutions. I understand you're inquiring about a foundation inspection at 1247 Meadowbrook?" I hadn't called any inspection company, but I played along. "That's right. Sir, I have to tell you, we did a preliminary assessment of that property 6 months ago. The current owners contacted us about remediation costs." Her voice carried professional concern. "The estimates were substantial." "How substantial?" "Minimum $40,000 for emergency stabilization. Full repair would run closer to $80,000. The house isn't safe for long-term occupancy without immediate intervention." After hanging up, I sat in the coffee shop, watching steam rise from my untouched cup. The pieces of their deception were falling into place like dominoes. They hadn't just stolen my money, they'd stuck me with a house that was literally falling apart. But they'd made one crucial mistake. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for my old colleague, Tom Brennan. 30 years of structural engineering experience, licensed in Montana, and most importantly, someone who owed me a favor from our days at Morrison Kessler Engineering. "Tom, it's Doug Evans. I need a professional favor, and I think you're going to find this case very interesting." The sky outside the coffee shop was turning gray, promising snow. Winter was coming to Billings, and with it, the season of reckoning. I had spent 40 years building things that lasted. Now it was time to build something different. A trap so carefully constructed that my dear daughter and her husband would walk right into it, smiling all the way down. That budding idea from the drive solidified as I returned to the motel, ready to strike. Tom Brennan's expertise would be my weapon, but first I needed ammunition. I pulled out my laptop and began researching Montana's building code enforcement procedures. The state website was surprisingly user-friendly. Anonymous complaints could be filed online, triggering mandatory inspections within 72 hours. All I needed was the property address and specific violations to report. I opened a new document and began typing, Foundation irregularities at 1247 Meadowbrook Drive. Potential safety hazards noted by multiple residents. Request immediate structural inspection. Report sent. The confirmation email arrived instantly, along with a case number and inspector contact information. My 40 years of engineering had taught me exactly which keywords would trigger urgent attention from building authorities. Outside my window, December snow began falling in fat, lazy flakes. The weather matched my mood: cold, steady, inexorable. I pulled on my coat and drove through the quiet streets toward Meadowbrook Drive, curiosity burning in my chest. The inspection van was already there. I parked 2 blocks away and walked back, playing the role of a concerned neighborhood resident. The inspector, a serious-looking woman in a hard hat, was photographing the foundation cracks with professional intensity. Her assistant measured settlement patterns with a laser level. Through the front window, I could see Maria pacing frantically, her phone pressed to her ear. Nicholas stood behind her, gesturing wildly with his hands. Their body language screamed panic. "Excuse me," I said to the inspector. "Is everything all right with that house? We've been concerned about safety in the neighborhood." She looked up from her clipboard. "Structural integrity investigation. Can't say more than that, but I'd recommend neighbors keep an eye on any settlement in their own foundations." As I walked back to my car, Maria burst through the front door. "This is harassment," she shouted at the inspector. "Someone's deliberately targeting us." Her voice carried across the cold air, sharp with fear and fury. I smiled, pulling my jacket tighter against the wind. Target number 1 had been hit. That evening, I sat in a coffee shop downtown, laptop open, monitoring my handiwork. The building department's online portal showed the case status: active investigation, structural concerns confirmed. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Who are you, and what do you want?" I deleted it without responding. Let them wonder. The next morning brought more snow and more results. I drove past the house to find yellow warning tape stretched across the front entrance. A large notice was posted on the door: occupancy restricted, pending structural remediation. The crack in the foundation looked wider in the gray morning light, like justice finally breaking through their careful facade. I thought of Margaret, of her quiet strength and unwavering sense of right and wrong. She would have been proud of this moment. My phone rang. Tom Brennan. "Doug, got your message about that property inspection. Fascinating case. I've been consulting with the city inspector. The foundation problems are worse than we initially thought." "How much worse?" "We're talking complete foundation replacement. Minimum cost of $120,000. House is uninhabitable until repairs are completed." I closed my eyes, savoring the mathematics of justice. They'd stolen my $200,000, plus another $60,000 in fraudulent loans. Now they faced $120,000 in mandatory repairs on a house they couldn't live in. "Tom, hypothetically speaking, if the current owners defaulted on their mortgage due to these structural issues, what would happen?" "Foreclosure, most likely. Bank would seize the property, sell it at auction to recover their losses. Current owners would lose everything and still owe the difference." "Perfect. Absolutely perfect." Through the coffee shop window, I watched holiday decorations going up across downtown Billings. Twinkling lights and wreaths, symbols of joy and family celebration. Soon, very soon, Maria and Nicholas would understand exactly how it felt to lose everything you'd worked for. But they'd also given me an unexpected gift. Their predictable panic was making them sloppy. Time to see just how far they go to save themselves. Their panic from the inspection erupted into retaliation, buzzing through my phone that evening. A Facebook notification lit up my screen. Tag, Douglas Evans, in a post from Maria's account. I opened the app and felt my blood pressure spike. Please share this warning about my father, Douglas Evans. The post began. He has become vindictive and dangerous since we asked him to find his own place. He's been harassing us, filing false reports with the city, and we believe he may be mentally unstable. If you see him around your property or neighborhood, please call the police immediately. The post had 17 shares already, spreading through Billings social media like wildfire. Comments were pouring in from friends and strangers alike, each one adding fuel to their character assassination campaign. So sorry you're dealing with this. Elder abuse goes both ways. Stay safe. Has he been evaluated for dementia? Lies spread like spilled ink on white paper. I scrolled through Maria's friends list, recognizing names from our past, people who'd attended family barbecues, who'd congratulated me at her wedding, who'd called me a devoted father. Now they were sharing warnings about my supposed mental deterioration. The next morning, I discovered the campaign had expanded beyond social media. At the grocery store, the cashier who'd known me for 15 years avoided eye contact. In the pharmacy, conversation stopped when I entered. At the gas station, a woman actually crossed to the other pump when she saw me approaching. Nicholas had been busy too. I found his contribution on a neighborhood watch forum. Dangerous elderly man stalking Meadowbrook Drive residents. Claims to own property he doesn't. Maybe suffering from delusions. Approach with caution. But their desperation was showing me something valuable. They understood I was a threat. Real threats don't require fictional warnings. I pulled out my phone and began documenting everything. Screenshots of their posts, photos of the yellow tape on their house, copies of the building department reports. Every lie they told online would become evidence of their fraudulent behavior. At the public library, I created new email accounts and began reaching out to their social media supporters with facts, building inspection reports, loan fraud documentation, bank statements showing the forged signatures. Before you share warnings about Douglas Evans, I wrote, you might want to see the evidence of what his daughter and the son-in-law actually did to him. By noon, the narrative was shifting. Comments on Maria's post were taking a different tone. Wait, is this the same Maria who was bragging about her new house? Didn't she just post about expensive renovations? Where'd that money come from? This sounds like there's more to the story. I sat in the library watching their online support crumble in real time. The truth, as always, was more compelling than fiction. My phone rang. Maria's number. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Hello, sweetheart. Dad, we need to talk. Her voice was strained, careful. There's been some misunderstandings. Oh? What kind of misunderstandings? About the house? About the money? About everything? Nicholas and I think we may have overreacted. I smiled, watching snow fall past the library windows. Overreacted to what exactly? To asking you to leave. We were stressed about the house payments, and we said things we didn't mean. Maybe we could work something out. The trap was closing exactly as I designed it. Their panic was driving them back to me, the very person they'd betrayed and discarded. I'm listening, I said, though I already knew exactly what I was going to demand in return. Their brewing scheme materialized the next morning, with a message lighting up my screen. Maria's text arrived at 7:43 a.m. Dad, can we meet? There's so much we need to say. Please give us one chance to make this right. I stared at the message while sipping coffee in the motel's cramped breakfast area. The desperation in her words was palpable, even through digital text. After 3 days of declining social media support and mounting evidence of their fraud, they were ready to play their final card. I texted back, "Neutral location. Murphy's Diner on Grand Avenue. 1 hour." Murphy's Diner occupied a corner spot downtown, its windows fogged with December cold and the warmth of home cooking. I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a booth near the back where I could watch the entrance. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, poured coffee without being asked. Maria appeared first, scanning the room anxiously before spotting me. She wore her best winter coat, the one I'd bought her for Christmas 2 years ago, and carried herself with exaggerated fragility. Nicholas followed 3 steps behind, his usual swagger replaced by nervous energy. "Dad?" Maria slid into the booth across from me, reaching for my hands. I kept them wrapped around my coffee cup. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "We miss you so much," she continued, her voice breaking with practiced emotion. "The house feels empty without you. We realize how terribly we handled everything." Nicholas nodded vigorously. "We were stressed about money, Doug. You know how it is with a new mortgage, new responsibilities. We said things we didn't mean." I watched them perform their choreographed reconciliation, noting the small tells that betrayed their insincerity. Maria's eyes darted Nicholas whenever she spoke, seeking approval for her script. Nicholas kept checking his phone, as if expecting urgent news that would change their situation. "What exactly are you proposing?" I asked. "Come home," Maria said, tears forming on cue. "We'll go back to the original arrangement. Family dinners, shared expenses, everything we promised." "And the building department's findings?" Nicholas shifted uncomfortably. "That's just bureaucratic nonsense. Minor settling, nothing that can't be handled with some cosmetic repairs." A falsely warm hug feeling hollow echoed through my memory. Margaret's embrace the last time I'd seen her alive, genuine and complete. This performance was its opposite, calculated, empty, designed to manipulate rather than connect. "Interesting," I said, "because the inspector's report mentions foundation replacement, not cosmetic repairs." Maria's composure cracked slightly. "Well, maybe it's more serious than we initially thought, but we can work together to fix it, like a real family." "With whose money?" The question hung in the air like smoke from extinguished candle. Nicholas leaned forward, his mask slipping further. "Look, Doug, we know you've got resources. We know you're smart enough to solve problems like this. That's why we need you back." There it was, the truth beneath their tears. They didn't want me. They wanted my wallet. Again. I pulled out my phone and set it on the table, making sure they could see the screen. A recording app was running, red dot blinking steadily. "Tell me about the loan you took out in my name," I said quietly. Maria went pale. Nicholas's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as he set it down. "I don't know what you mean," Maria whispered. $60,000. First National Bank. Signed with a perfect forgery of my signature. Ring any bells? Silence fell. The diner's ambient noise, conversations, clinking silverware, the hiss of the grill seemed unnaturally loud. Nicholas reached over and grabbed Maria's wrist, squeezing until she winced. "We need to go," he said, standing abruptly. "Sit down," I said, my voice carrying enough authority to stop him mid-rise. "We're not finished." But they were already moving, Maria fumbling for her purse while Nicholas threw a 20 on the table. Their carefully planned reconciliation had disintegrated in less than 10 minutes. This isn't over, old man, Nicholas muttered as they reached the door. I sat alone in the booth, watching them hurry across the parking lot through the frost-covered window. The waitress approached with a fresh pot of coffee. "Everything all right, hun?" she asked. "Perfect," I replied, stopping the recording and saving it to 3 different cloud accounts. Absolutely perfect. Outside, snow began falling again, each flake settling with the quiet persistence of truth. I pulled out my notebook and added today's date to my timeline, along with detailed notes about their desperate performance. The manipulation attempt had failed completely, but it had given me something even more valuable: recorded evidence of their guilt and a clear demonstration of their continued lies. Time to make their desperation official. Those manipulative echoes faded as I dialed the lawyer, stepping into action. I'd found Rebecca Morrison through online reviews, a family law attorney with a reputation for handling complex financial fraud cases. Her office was scheduled for that afternoon. Morrison and Associates occupied the 2nd floor of a restored brick building downtown, its windows overlooking the courthouse where our battle would eventually unfold. Rebecca Morrison herself was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 45, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Evans," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "I've reviewed the materials you sent. This fraud claim is solid, but I want to understand the full scope before we proceed." I opened my briefcase and began laying out evidence like an engineer presenting blueprints, bank statements showing the forged signatures, building inspection reports confirming the hidden defects, screenshots of their social media slander campaign, the recorded conversation from Murphy's Diner. "They took your retirement savings as a gift, then fraudulently obtained additional funds using your identity," she summarized, reviewing each document carefully. "Meanwhile, they concealed known structural defects that make the property essentially worthless." Correct. "And when the defects were exposed, they launched a public campaign claiming I was mentally unstable." Rebecca leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. "The financial fraud alone is a federal crime. Add the defamation, and we're looking at substantial damages. What outcome are you seeking?" "Full restitution, criminal charges where applicable, and I want them to publicly admit what they did." She smiled, the first genuine warmth I'd seen from anyone in weeks. "Mr. Evans, I believe we can accomplish all of that. But fair warning, family litigation gets ugly. They'll fight dirty. They already have. Filed." The word carried finality as Rebecca's secretary stamped our complaint at the courthouse 3 days later. The case number, CV 2024-1847, would become their nightmare and my vindication. Within hours, my phone exploded with messages. "Dad, what have you done?" Maria's voicemail was pure panic. "We can work this out. Don't destroy our family over misunderstanding." Nicholas left his own message, his tone shifting between threats and pleas. "This is insane, Doug. You're going to regret this. We'll countersue for harassment, for elder abuse, for everything. But if you drop this nonsense, we can still fix things." I saved every message, adding them to the growing evidence file. The local newspaper picked up the story. Retired engineer sues daughter for financial fraud. The article was brief but accurate, focusing on the unusual nature of family financial crime. Within hours, it was shared across social media, generating dozens of comments from people who'd experienced similar betrayals. Tom Brennan called that evening. "Doug saw the news. Need any expert testimony about the foundation problems?" "Absolutely. Can you put together a comprehensive report?" "Already started. This foundation failure is textbook negligence. No way they didn't know about it before the sale. Mrs. Patterson from the neighborhood also reached out, offering to testify about the previous owner's attempts to hide the defects. Bill Hartwell from the motel volunteered to confirm how he'd obtained the building inspector's preliminary report. My allies were emerging from unexpected places. The case calendar showed our first hearing scheduled for January 15th, 3 weeks away. Rebecca estimated the full trial would take place in March or April, depending on the court's schedule. Use this time to strengthen our evidence, she advised. Document every interaction, every threat, every attempt at manipulation. They're going to make mistakes, and we want to catch everyone. I spent the following days organizing our evidence into chronological order, creating a timeline that told the story with mathematical precision. Each folder was labeled and indexed: financial fraud, property defects, defamation campaign, manipulation attempts. The stack of folders on my motel desk grew daily, each one representing another aspect of their betrayal. But rather than feeling overwhelming, the process felt empowering. Every document was another nail in the coffin of their deception. As December 2024 wound toward its close, I sat reviewing our case briefs one final time. Outside my window, Billings settled into winter quiet, the kind of deep cold that preserves everything exactly as it should be. Soon, very soon, justice would have its day in court. The anticipation from those final preparations carried me to the courthouse steps that crisp January morning. The Yellowstone County Courthouse stood against the Montana sky like a monument to justice, its stone facade catching the first light of what would become the most satisfying day of my life. Rebecca Morrison met me at the metal detectors, her briefcase heavy with evidence that would expose every lie Maria and Nicholas had told. Behind her, Tom Brennan carried a folder thick with structural engineering reports. Mrs. Patterson had driven in from the neighborhood wearing her best dress and the determined expression of someone who'd witnessed too much injustice to stay silent. "Ready for this?" Rebecca asked as we climbed the marble steps. "I've been ready since September," I replied. Courtroom 3B filled with a hushed tension that precedes a reckoning. Maria and Nicholas sat at the defendant's table, flanked by their attorney, a nervous young man who kept shuffling papers and adjusting his tie. They'd aged in the months since our coffee shop confrontation. Maria's face was drawn, her usual confidence replaced by hollow-eyed anxiety. Nicholas slouched in his chair, jaw clenched with the fury of someone whose schemes had finally caught up with him. Judge Patricia Reeves entered with a gravity that 30 years on the bench had earned her. Gray-haired and sharp-eyed, she surveyed the courtroom with the air of someone who'd seen every kind of family betrayal and would tolerate none of it. "This court is now in session," the bailiff announced. "The case of Evans versus Evans and Hartley." Rebecca's opening statement laid out their crimes with surgical precision: financial fraud, identity theft, defamation, concealment of property defects, each charge supported by documents, recordings, and witness testimony that painted a picture of calculated greed. "Your Honor," she concluded, "the defendants didn't just steal money from Mr. Evans. They stole his trust, his dignity, and his belief in family. Today we ask this court to restore all three." Their attorney's response was weak, predictable: stress, misunderstandings, family discord blown out of proportion. His arguments crumbled under the weight of the evidence like a house built on faulty foundation. The witnesses told the story chronologically. Tom Brennan's expert testimony on the structural defects was devastating. Using enlarged photographs of the cracked foundation, he explained how the damage would have been visible during any competent inspection. In my professional opinion, Tom stated, looking directly at Maria and Nicholas, the previous owners and their real estate agent had to know about these defects. The settlement patterns alone would have been apparent months before the sale. Mrs. Patterson followed, describing the previous owner's attempts to hide the foundation problems with strategic landscaping and selective disclosure. Her testimony was matter-of-fact, damning in its simplicity. They moved that rose garden specifically to block the view of the worst cracks, she said. I watched them do it from my kitchen window. When Maria took the stand, her carefully rehearsed composure began to fracture under cross-examination. Mrs. Hartley, Rebecca began, did you know about the foundation problems before your father provided the down payment? We suspected there might be some minor settling issues, Maria admitted, her voice barely audible. Minor settling issues that would cost over $100,000 to repair. We did know it was that serious. Rebecca produced the building inspector's preliminary report, the one Bill Hartwell had found. This report is dated 3 weeks before the closing. It clearly identifies major structural concerns. You received a copy, didn't you? Maria's silence stretched until Judge Reeves prompted, Answer the question, Mrs. Hartley. Yes, she whispered. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Reeves's gavel brought silence, but the damage was done. Nicholas's testimony was worse. His arrogance, barely contained throughout the trial, finally boiled over during questioning about the forged loan documents. Look, the old man wasn't using that credit anyway, he snapped before his attorney could object. He was just sitting on money while we struggled with real expenses. Judge Reeves's expression could have frozen the Missouri River. The verdict came after less than 2 hours of deliberation. On the charge of financial fraud, Judge Reeves announced, the court finds for the plaintiff. The defendants are ordered to return the full $200,000 plus the $60,000 fraudulently obtained with interest. Guilty. On the charge of defamation, the court finds for the plaintiff. The defendants must issue public apologies on all social media platforms where false statements were made. The gavel struck like thunder. Additionally, this court is referring the matter of identity theft to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. I sat in stunned silence as the numbers added up. Full restitution, public humiliation, criminal charges pending. Everything I'd hoped for and more than I dared expect. As the courtroom emptied, Maria approached me hesitantly. Tears streamed down her face. Real ones this time, not the manufactured emotion from our coffee shop meeting. Dad, she began, but I held up my hand. The court has spoken, I said simply. We have nothing more to discuss. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca shook my hand with genuine warmth. That was one of the most clear-cut fraud cases I've ever seen. They made it easy by being so thoroughly dishonest. Tom clapped me on the shoulder. Justice served, Doug. Margaret would be proud. As I walked to my car, now equipped with an envelope containing copies of all court orders, I noticed something in the distance. A for sale sign had appeared in front of 1247 Meadowbrook Drive. Their dream house had become their nightmare, and my nightmare had become my vindication. In the months following the courtroom victory, I rebuilt my days steadily until one afternoon in May brought their envelope to my new mailbox. I'd purchased a modest ranch house on the east side of Billings, far from Meadowbrook Drive and close to the mountains I'd always loved. The garden was coming along nicely. Tomatoes and peppers thriving in the high plains sun, roses climbing the fence where they belonged. Letter arrived. The envelope was cream-colored expensive paper that spoke of deliberate thought rather than hasty desperation. My name was written in Maria's careful script, the same handwriting that had signed thank you cards and birthday wishes for 35 years. I carried it to the back porch, where my morning coffee had become a ritual of peace rather than planning. The Beartooth Mountains stretched across the horizon, snow-capped peaks catching the afternoon light. This view was mine, bought with the money they'd been forced to return, plus the substantial damages the court had awarded. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten on both sides. Maria's words came through like a voice from another life. Dad, we know we have no right to ask for your forgiveness. What we did was unforgivable. We were greedy, stupid, and cruel to the man who sacrificed everything for us. I sipped my coffee, noting how carefully she'd crafted each sentence. This wasn't the desperate scrambling of their earlier attempts. This was calculated humility, designed to achieve a specific outcome. Nicholas and I have had to start over completely. We lost the house, obviously. We're renting a small apartment while we rebuild our credit and our lives. The criminal charges were dropped as part of the restitution agreement, but the civil judgment follows us everywhere. Good, I thought. Let it follow them. We've both found jobs. Nothing glamorous. I'm cleaning houses. Nicholas is doing construction work. We're learning what it means to actually earn what we have. The next section made me pause. We want you to know that we understand now what we threw away. Not just the money, but the relationship. You were the best father anyone could ask for, and we repaid your love with betrayal. We don't expect forgiveness, but we hope someday you might give us the chance to show we've changed. I set the letter down and walked to the garden, where my hands found work among the tomato plants. The physical labor helped me think, the way it always had, weeding, watering, tending to things that grew honestly in good soil. Their apology might be genuine. People could change, could learn from consequences, could grow into better versions of themselves. Margaret had always believed in second chances, in the possibility of redemption. But forgiveness, I'd learned, didn't require reconciliation. I could forgive them for my own peace without inviting them back into my life. Some bridges once burned were better left as ash. The final page contained the real request. We know we have no right to ask, but we're hoping that someday, maybe next year, maybe in 5 years, you might be willing to see us again. Not as family necessarily, but as people who want to make amends. We're starting therapy, both individual and couples counseling. We want to understand how we became the kind of people who could hurt someone who loved us so much. I folded the letter carefully and walked back to the porch. The mountains hadn't moved, hadn't changed. They would be there tomorrow and next year and long after all of us were gone. There was something comforting in that permanence. My phone sat on the table beside my coffee cup. I could call them. I could write back. I could begin the long, difficult process of rebuilding what they'd destroyed. Or I could simply continue building the life I discovered in their absence, a life of morning coffee and evening gardens, of friends who valued honesty, of quiet satisfaction in work well done. I picked up the letter one more time, reading Maria's final words. We love you, Dad. We know we have no right to that love after what we did, but it's the only true thing in this whole mess. We love you, and we're sorry. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. Somewhere in town, my daughter and her husband were learning hard lessons about consequence and character. Somewhere else, other families were probably repeating the same ancient dramas of greed and betrayal, love and loss. But here, on this porch, in this moment, justice felt complete. I left the letter on the table and went inside to start dinner. Tomorrow I would decide what, if anything, to do with her words. Tonight, I had a garden to tend and a quiet house to enjoy. The mountains would still be there in the morning, and so would I. If you like the story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.